Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Banfield, and this is Drop Dead Serious. It took a 17-year-old guy from Canada who is a rising senior in high school to put Chris Nanos, the sheriff of Pima County in Arizona, to the test. And to make some very big headlines in the Savannah Guthrie, Nancy Guthrie missing persons case. Sheriff Nanos hasn't granted a lot of interviews, and certainly very few to the major networks and the big podcasts of late. We are 6 months into the case of Nancy Guthrie with still no answers, no leads certainly that have been made public, and no solutions as to where she is and where Porch Guy is. But there's so many questions, right, still afoot. And looking back all these months, a lot of questions about maybe there have been some missteps along the way. And this young man named Wyatt Sharp asked those questions. So first and foremost, you should know, I've known Wyatt Sharp since he was about 12, because Wyatt Sharp reached out to me and asked if he could interview me and said, I have a YouTube show and I interview, big name people like the Prime Minister of Canada. And I thought, who is this kid? And I clicked a link and I watched his show and I thought, this is a really smart 12-year-old kid. I'm doing this interview. And since then, I've helped Wyatt Sharp along in navigating his career. And boy, what a career it is. If you've ever seen his show, it's called The Sharp Exchange. Highly advise that you check it out and then subscribe. He's just a really brilliant interviewer. And I'm not going to say kid, he's actually one of the smarter journalists I know and has been for years. He's a prodigy. Honest to God, wait for it. We're all going to work for Wyatt.
6 months into the Nancy Guthrie disappearance, a 17-year-old journalist asked Sheriff Chris Nanos questions that apparently no one else bothered to ask. And what he revealed, or didn't reveal, tells you something important about how this investigation is actually running versus how it wants to appear. Here's what we're unpacking today. First, the sheriff said out loud on camera that he has never spoken to FBI Director Kash Patel. Not once. Never met him. They're supposedly working a joint task force on a nationally televised missing person case the president has publicly weighed in saying they're close to resolution. And the two men leading the investigation never have talked. That's not just unusual. That's structural dysfunction documented on the record.
Headline number one. Wyatt was able to assess how Chris Nanos, the sheriff of Pima County, feels about the FBI Director Kash Patel, and he was highly critical. Listen to this exchange between Wyatt and Sheriff Chris Nanos.
Well, I don't know the FBI director. Never met him. So my relationship is what we see or hear as you do
right
on the news.
Okay, so there you have it. That's a rift, and a bit shocking that the sheriff has not spoken.
Second, the sheriff confirmed they're running forensic genetic genealogy on unknown DNA found inside Nancy's home. That means they're not just looking for a match in a database. They're fanning out to thousands of relatives, years-long gumshoe detective work, trying to figure out if this DNA belongs to the killer, the kidnapper, or just someone who was there. He didn't volunteer this information. He was asked. And when he was, the answer suggested they're much further behind than months of silence indicated. Third, when pressed on early scene decisions, releasing the crime scene within 36 hours, shutting down the search, declaring no community threat, the sheriff blamed the FBI, contradicted his own previous statements, and essentially refused accountability. Except there's documented evidence. He told different outlets different stories about the same decisions. Fourth, the Guthrie family, whose daughter is missing, hasn't spoken to the sheriff recently. He says they don't need to. They have his contact info. They have their own team. Meanwhile, public reporting says there's friction. That's not a small detail. That's a family separated from the official investigation by uncertainty at exactly the moment they should be closest to it. Fifth, he refused to discuss physical evidence, flower pots, blood patterns, the evidence that could move leads forward, claiming it would compromise the investigation's integrity. Except he's discussed some of it before with other outlets. So what changed? Is the evidence still relevant to finding someone? Or is the investigation protecting itself? This is the story of an investigation that looks increasingly like it's managing perception more than finding answers. And we're going to separate what was actually documented in that interview from what law enforcement wants you to believe about where this case really stands. Let me start with the most stunning admission the sheriff and the FBI director have never spoken. Think about the structure of that for a second. You have a missing person case. In February 2025, that made national headlines immediately. The victim is connected to public figures. News coverage is relentless. The President of the United States, within days, says on Air Force One they're close to resolution. He didn't get that from nowhere. He got it from his FBI Director, Kash Patel. That's the chain of information. And yet, 6 months in, Sheriff Nanos says, flatly under interview, I don't know the FBI Director, never met him. Wyatt Sharp, the 17-year-old journalist conducting the interview, pushed back. He said, essentially, the president is commenting on your case. That suggests the FBI director is briefing him, so how have you two never spoken? And the sheriff's response was that it's actually unorthodox for an FBI director to be directly involved in a local case. That might be true administratively. But Nanos didn't say it was a problem. He said it was the reason they'd never talked. That's a deflection, not an explanation. Here's what we actually know from documented reporting. Kash Patel was in Tucson early in the investigation. He met with the task force. There's a documented joint operation between Pima County Homicide and FBI field agents. And yet, if Nanos is telling the truth, the man nominally overseeing federal involvement never personally communicated with the sheriff running the local side. That's either a catastrophic gap in operational procedure, or it's a gap being explained away after the fact as normal. What it means practically, if the president's public confidence in the case 6 months ago came from the FBI director, and the FBI director's information didn't come from direct conversation with the sheriff, then who was he talking to? Field agents. Quantico analysts reviewing case files. And were they feeding him information that matched what Nanos actually knew? Because if they weren't, then you have the president making public statements about a case based on incomplete or parallel information. That's not just bad optics. That's a structural problem in how the case is being communicated to the highest levels. Nanos didn't seem to recognize this as a problem. Or he recognized it and wasn't going to say so on camera. Now, let's talk about what they are actually doing with the DNA, because this is where the investigation's actual progress, or lack of it, becomes visible.
Are actually doing what we were thinking they might be doing, and that is forensic genetic genealogy. Fanning out to the tens, hundreds, or thousands of people that might share a little bit of that DNA and figuring out if they might have a connection to the person whose DNA it actually is. And that is a gumshoe detective process that could take months and years. And that is what the sheriff actually conceded and confirmed to Wyatt Sharp that that's the process they're in right now. Here's how he put it.
We're doing all of it. And
Okay.
that's really the labs are doing it all. They're looking at genealogy, but they're also looking at specific pieces of evidence that they're hoping to get enough codi to say, this is who we're looking at.
For months, the public heard only that unknown male DNA was found in Nancy's home. It was a mixture, it was complex. They were working on it. Very sophisticated technology. No timeline. That's what you say when you don't want to say anything. And it worked. Media moved on. Public attention cycled. 6 months passed, no resolution, no clear forensic breakthrough announced. But in this interview, Nanos confirmed something specific. They're running forensic familial genealogy. That's the technique made famous by the Golden State Killer case. You take a DNA profile, even a partial one, upload it to a genealogy database where millions of people have submitted DNA for ancestry purposes, and you look for relatives, second cousins, third cousins, distant matches. Then you work through those matches methodically, eliminating people based on geography, age, criminal history, whatever. Eventually, you narrow down to possibilities. Then you do the physical surveillance and DNA testing on those actual individuals until you match the evidence. It works, but, and this is crucial, it takes time. Years, sometimes, not because the lab is slow, Because once you identify a suspect from genealogy, you have to actually follow up on them. You have to find them, get close to them, obtain something they've touched, test it. That's detective work. That's manpower. That's sustained investigation over months.
Over for a while, and that is that it doesn't take that long to separate mixed DNA. Otherwise, we'd never, ever solve rape cases. Those are mixed cases. Multiple murders, those are mixed cases. So it doesn't take that long. What does take a long time is the process of forensic genetic familial genealogy. And that's because whatever they found in that house that was foreign, DNA that wasn't supposed to be there, we still don't know if that's the actual killer or the porch guy.
Exactly.
We just know it's a DNA they need to figure out. Who was it? Was it the FedEx guy or was it the bad guy?
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you can get a little piece that can fan out to be thousands of people, all who share that little piece. Then you got to do the lengthy process of gumshoe detective work. You got to find all those people, eliminate them based on, well, this guy's too old and that's a woman, and that guy hasn't left the UK and this guy has never left Mexico, whatever. You limit it down. And then when you get the possibilities, then you've actually got to follow them and pick up a pizza box or pick up a Coke can or a Kleenex. And you've got to test the DNA to find out who's your guy. And maybe that's what he's...
The reason Nanos probably hadn't volunteered this was obvious. Admitting you're doing genealogy work means admitting you don't have a suspect yet. It means the investigation is still in the wide, net phase, casting across thousands of relatives, hoping to narrow down. That's not the image you project when you want people to think you're close to an answer.
And then the big question. Wyatt asked Sheriff Nanos if he thinks that Nancy Guthrie is still alive. Listen to the answer, because I think this is very telling. Obviously, so many people think after 6 months, how could she possibly be alive? And we almost expect the sheriff to say that, but here's how he put it.
I believe that I'm going to support the Guthrie family every way possible. And if they believe she's alive, so do I.
And then the big question. I assume there's an open line of communication between Savannah Guthrie and her family and the Pima County Sheriff's Department through the sheriff himself. And Wyatt asked very pointedly, have you been speaking with Savannah? And the answer was pretty astounding.
But here's something worth sitting with. The DNA found in Nancy's home might not be the killer's. It might be a delivery person, a contractor, a guest. The investigation doesn't know yet, so they're spending months and years to figure out if it even matters. That's not a flaw in procedure. That's the reality of forensic work when evidence is ambiguous. But it also means at 6 months, they're not closer to a perpetrator. They're still narrowing down whether they have a clue at all. And when Nanos was asked how long this might take, he deflected to his lab team, said they're handling it. He's not directly involved. That's technically true. But it's also a way of saying I can't tell you when this ends because it depends on matches we haven't found yet and follow-up work we haven't started. The investigation isn't hiding. It's just not telling you it's still in phase 1.
I mean, he said that they had slowed down. I asked him if he could quantify that in some way. Obviously, quantifying it in this instance isn't necessarily an exact number so much as just like a general indication. And yeah, he said they have slowed down, but I think the way in which he was trying to provide this answer was acknowledging the truth, and that is, again, that they're not getting nearly as many leads as they were at the very beginning, without making it, a reason to think that the case had gone cold. And so he said, we're getting a fewer amount of leads, but, we're still getting some of high quality, and it's...
Let's talk about the thing nobody in major media seems to be asking clearly. Why did the sheriff release the scene, shut down the search, and declare no public threat, all within 36 hours?
Of the sheriff, because I'm in the business of true crime and I know investigations, and I saw some things early on in this investigation that were a total mess. And that is within 36 hours he released the scene. He said there's nothing to see here. There's no cause for alarm in the community. And we've stopped the search for Nancy Guthrie. And I thought, what the heck were you thinking? Did you press him on those early decisions and whether he now recognizes that they were all really bad decisions?
Wyatt Sharp didn't ask directly. He was strategic about it. He said so in the interview. He knew it would make Nanos defensive, So he framed it differently. He highlighted contradictions. Nanos had told the Arizona Republic the scene was released too soon. Then he told another outlet any suggestion that was a mistake was silly. So Sharp pointed out that inconsistency. Nanos acknowledged early decisions may have implicated the case, then immediately blamed the FBI, saying if they'd been there earlier, they could have done better evidence collection.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually ask him directly about the brother-in-law. For one reason, I was trying to be a little bit strategic in terms of like the behind the scenes of the interview about things that I had seen him get angry about in the past. And I know that he's obviously cleared the family and he wasn't going to say anything too different likely. But he gets quite angry when people ask him about the family members. He gets quite angry when people ask him about his own criticism that he's facing or some of like the local politics in his county there. So my angle with it was trying to ask him questions that I knew would make news depending on his answer, and also balancing that with not making him so angry and egotistical in some ways as well that he would not want to answer some of the other potential newsworthy questions that I had had.
That's a non-answer presented as accountability, and it's deliberate.
FBI Director Kash Patel was almost an attempt to try and, again, use it as a scapegoat to take accountability away from his office and put it on somebody else.
Here's the documented timeline. Nancy Guthrie disappears on February 1st. By February 2nd, Nanos holds a press conference saying there's no threat to the community. The scene is released. The search is called off. Within a week, investigators tell media they have a prime suspect, Nancy's brother-in-law. They tow his car, hold it for over 2 months. Except they cleared the brother-in-law. He wasn't involved. And by then, weeks had passed. The scene had been handled as if the threat was contained. The public didn't know to be looking for anyone else. And someone the family called Porch Guy, a figure captured on doorbell video, was still unknown. Now, Nanos didn't cause this alone. But he made a choice within 36 hours based on incomplete information, and when that choice turned out to be wrong, the investigation had to pivot months later. That's not villainy. That's the cost of tunneling early. And the cost, in this case, was time. This is where media literacy matters. Every outlet, including major networks, covered Nanos saying he might have released the scene too soon. Then, when he contradicted himself and blamed the FBI, most outlets reported both statements as if they were equally valid. They weren't. One is accountability. One is deflection. The contradiction is the story. But treating it as both sides coverage, you lose the actual point. The investigation made a call that didn't pan out, and rather than fully reckon with that, it's now spreading responsibility across agencies.
Whether he now recognizes that they were all really bad decisions?
He, to be honest, what I tried to do was stay away from things that he's been asked about, a bajillion times. And so he had said to the Arizona Republic that he thought the scene was released too soon. But then later he told KVOA that he thought any kind of suggestion otherwise was silly, was the word that he had used. And so the kind of angle that I took with this was highlighting some of the contradictions that he previously had. But
now let's talk about the Guthrie family itself, because this is where the disconnect becomes painful. Wyatt asked Nanos directly, "Have you spoken to Savannah Guthrie recently?" The answer was no. The sheriff said he hasn't spoken to her recently. She has his contact information. Everyone has his contact information. She's in touch with her own team, her own investigators. She doesn't need to contact the sheriff.
And then the big question. I assume there's an open line of communication between Savannah Guthrie and her family and the Pima County Sheriff's Department through the sheriff himself. And Wyatt asked very pointedly, "Have you been speaking with Savannah?" And the answer was pretty astounding. Apparently not. Have a listen.
Well, our relationship is a good relationship. I mean, these are tough times. But no, I've not spoken with Savannah recently. She has my contact number, as you and the rest of the world seems to have. But she's very gracious, and she doesn't need to contact the sheriff. She needs a team that she's very well aware of that works with her, and she's in contact with them.
That might sound fine, but read it for what it actually is. The sheriff is saying the victim's family doesn't need to stay in direct communication with him because they're running their own investigation. That's not confidence in the official investigation. That's a family that's lost faith. And Nanos is framing. She doesn't need to contact the sheriff. She needs her team, is telling. It positions himself as optional. It suggests the investigation isn't the family's primary resource. Maybe it's not. But if a sheriff had to admit that publicly, something has broken. Public reporting has documented friction. The family has spoken about the pace of the investigation being too slow. Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's sister, in law and a public figure herself, has made statements expressing frustration. The family hired their own investigators, and when Wyatt pointed this out to Nanos, noting that there are documented reports of friction, Nanos said he has zero indication the family is frustrated with law enforcement. That's not just wrong. It's documented to be wrong by the family's own public statements.
But there had been reports, right, that there was some friction between the Guthrie family and the sheriff's office. There was, some reports as well that had said that Savannah Guthrie was developing her own team, kind of, which he acknowledged in the interview. But he said that he has, quote, zero indication that the Guthrie family is frustrated with law enforcement, which I don't know if that's fair, because I think obviously anyone who was in this unimaginably tragic situation probably would want the pace of the investigation to be moving a little bit faster than it probably.
This is another contradiction. But this one matters because it shows how the investigation responds to criticism from the family it's supposed to be serving. Instead of engaging with that frustration, it denies it exists. Instead of deepening communication, it suggests the family has moved on to their own resources. Here's a real question for you if you're the Guthrie family 6 months in and law enforcement is still working through genealogy matches, still hasn't ruled out your geographic area as where the suspect might be, still can't talk about physical evidence that might spur public leads. What do? Do you wait for the investigation to finish in its own time? Or do you hire your own team to push forward? Because the family did both, and Nanos' response was to say that's fine. Actually, you don't need me. That's not how you talk when you're confident in your investigation. That's how you talk when you're managing expectations. Let's bring this back to something specific, because this is where we separate what's documented from what people assume. The physical evidence. Flower pots near the door. Blood patterns, scene details. When Wyatt asked Nanos about the flower pots, whether they were positioned to facilitate a fast exit, Nanos declined. He said he's not discussing physical evidence. And when Wyatt asked about blood patterns, same answer.
Were reportedly near the door, and whether or not he thought that they did that for a fast exit, he declined to answer that. I asked him about the blood pattern. Was there blood both inside the house?
Wait. Go back to the flower pots. How did he decline? Did he say, I'm not going to discuss that? Or did he say, I don't know if the flower pots were left there for that reason? Like, how did he dismiss it? Because sometimes you can get info.
No, he declined because, so on that one and the blood pattern one, both of them together, he declined, saying, I'm not going to talk about anything to do with the physical evidence, which, I think there was one question that I asked him, I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was a physical evidence question that I had thought he had addressed before, and so then my mind went to, well, maybe he's just refusing to answer any questions at all now on physical evidence, even the ones where he could theoretically give an answer on, because he doesn't want people to be able to identify which questions he's kind of hiding from and not giving an answer on.
So did you get the feeling that he's answered physical?
But Nanos has discussed some physical evidence before, in other interviews, so why now claim he can't discuss any of it? Wyatt's theory, which is worth sitting with, is that Nanos is now refusing to answer any physical evidence questions as a blanket policy, specifically so reporters can't identify which questions he's avoiding. If he answered some and refused others, you could map what he's hiding. But if he refuses all of them, all the evasion looks the same. Is that true? I don't know. But it's a documented shift in his public stance, and there's a strategic logic to it if you're trying to control a narrative. Here's what I think is worth asking in the comments. If the flower pots are exculpatory, if they show something that helps rule out certain scenarios, wouldn't releasing that information actually help? Wouldn't it allow the public to rule out certain theories and focus on actionable leads? Or is the flower pot detail something that complicates the investigation's own working theory and therefore needs to stay buried until they figure out what it means? Because that's a real interpretive gap. It's possible he's protecting evidence. It's also possible he's protecting the investigation's credibility by not answering questions that might reveal inconsistencies or dead ends. Let me point you toward something almost nobody's covering, because Wyatt asked about it and barely got an answer. Mexican authorities from Sonora brought a tip, a burial site tip, credible enough that they dispatched security forces to search. They found it worth their time, and Pima County essentially did nothing with it. When Wyatt asked Nanos if they should have engaged more with Mexican law enforcement pursued cross-border coordination, Nanos got puzzled. He asked Wyatt what oilier or bigger would have looked like, as if Wyatt should tell him how to run the investigation.
Nogales and Sonora tips that were brought in, should you have made an earlier attempt to engage with the Mexican authorities, for example? And he got a little bit puzzled. He was like, well, I don't know what earlier or bigger would have looked like. If you can tell me, then let me know.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, which I thought was kind of strange because
he's asking a 17-year-old
he was very nice. He was very nice. I don't want people to get the wrong impression, but I just thought it was interesting. I think he was kind of talking, as the collective you, so to speak. But I just thought it was weird because when that tip came in from Nogales about the burial site, I thought, okay, we did an interview about this on my show. And I thought, okay, well, this is the first real tip about her whereabouts that we've received. And my notion in this question was just there seems to be nothing really done to, put this tip to bed or to put it to rest. And so I just thought, maybe there's more tips like this. Should you be engaging with them more? Because we've only heard of that one from Mexico. And he didn't really answer that question either.
That's a failure, maybe, to recognize a potential lead. Or it's something else, it's a lead that didn't pan out, and now it's being minimized. But here's the competitor gap. Every other outlet covering this case has basically dropped the Mexico angle. It happened, there was activity, and then silence. Nobody's reporting on why that tip went nowhere, whether it was actually investigated, or whether it's still active. That's a documented detail that just fell out of the media cycle. You should want to know why Mexican authorities thought they had something real and why, 6 months later, that lead appears dormant. We're 6 months in. The core investigative team is still together, which is good, but the task force has shrunk. Leads have slowed to a trickle. The FBI director and the sheriff have never spoken. The family is running their own investigation. The DNA work could take years. Physical evidence isn't being discussed, and the public, by Wyatt's assessment, basically has no more information than they did on February 1st.
Well, actually, just really quickly, on the task force point, because I asked him about that as well, because I was trying to get him to quantify or at least make some kind of a comparison between what the task force was like at the very beginning compared to what it is like now. And he was definitely inferring that it has shrunk a little bit, but he did confirm that the core investigative team has remained together since the beginning of the case, which is not surprising necessarily. But we can get
That's not because a case is hard. That's because the investigation is managing what you know about the case more carefully than it's pursuing the case itself. The closing question Nanos got asked was whether he thought Nancy was still alive. And he said, if the family thinks she's alive, so do I. But what he actually meant, Wyatt suggested, was something different. He said, as a sheriff, what good does it do the public if I say I think she's dead? That's not a statement about what he believes. That's a statement about strategy.
He said, I don't know if I want to read too much into this or make your viewers read too much into it, but I said to him, thank you so much, that was great. It's very common that I say that after the interview. I want to end on a good note regardless of how the interview went. And he said, well, I don't know about that. So I don't know if it was like a playful thing for him where he was like, joking about the quality of his responses, or if it was more of a serious, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I answered those questions, right? Like, it was very hard to gauge, but it was definitely a moment that resonated with me, because either way, it's interesting that he said that after the conversation.
Because believing she might still be alive keeps momentum. Saying she's likely dead kills the case in the public imagination. So he said what would keep the investigation alive, not what he actually thinks. And that's the gap. That's the thing separating what you see from what's actually being decided behind closed doors. If you've got a theory about what happened in Nancy Guthrie's home or who Porch Guy might be, drop it in the comments. Because the more evidence and theory we have publicly, the more pressure that creates for information to actually move. 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's still the number. Loose lips months later after the crime sink ships.